Good morning. Welcome to the University of Missouri St. Louis, and welcome to the Ethics, a Foundation for Success Alumni Conversations series. I am Shu Schiller, Dean of the College of Business Administration at UMSL. It is our great pleasure to meet our students, business and non-business, our faculty, staff, and friends. Today marks the 5th conversation in this speaking series. And this program cannot be successful without our generous sponsors, the Mary and Joseph Stephen. So let me tell you a little bit about Joe Stephen. In 1982, Joe Stephen graduated from UMSL Business with a finance degree. He then began his career and worked as an analyst and examiner for Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. And 3 years later, in 1985, he became the Senior Vice President and Director of the Financial Institutions Research Group at Stifel, Nicklaus & Company. And in the same year, he graduated with his MBA degree, second time, from UMSL Business. Today, Joe Stephen is President, Chairman, and CEO of Stephen Capital Advisors, and he serves as a member on Chancellor's Council. Joe cannot be here today, but if he would be here, he would want to share with you how he and Mary were inspired to create this program. First, Joe is one of you. He's a double alumni from UMSL Business, and he credits the university for equipping him for his professional success. Additionally, Joe considers ethics the cornerstone of life. And quote, "Ethics will eliminate our society's ills, problems, and isms." We appreciate Mary and Joseph Stephen for creating this wonderful event, Ethics, Foundation for Success Alumni Conversations. For today's event, you are going to hear personal insights from an esteemed business alum. Some of you got his book already, right? How many of you has Orv's book? And our time in the theater will include Orv's speaking. We will have a Q&A right here. At about noon, lunch will be served in the lobby. And this is also very important. We have other alumni cohort members available today. You will have the opportunity to meet with them and have one-on-one conversations. It is now my great pleasure to welcome our Chancellor, Kristen Sobolik.
So good morning, everybody. I have been so looking forward to this day for what it represents, an incredible opportunity for you, our students and others, to enter into conversation with some of our most successful alumni. Those, you're going to be successful alumni as well, and you could be here as well in the future. Now, Joe, Stephen, and I personally invited the other members of the cohort to participate in this series. So far, you have been privileged to hear not only from Joe, but also from Warner Baxter, who is recently retired chairman and chief executive officer of Ameren, who is unable to be here today. Marcela Manjarez, who's the former Executive Vice President and Chief Communication Officer of Centene. Marcela, thank you for being here today. And Sandra Van Trees, former Group President of BJC Healthcare. Sandra was our speaker in this past April, and we are so glad that you are here again today, Sandra. These are just examples of some of our wonderful alumni who are out and about in the world doing fantastic things and living their dreams. You have your own dreams, and I know you're going to go out and do the same thing. Now today, we have another great opportunity to hear from an exceptional UMSL alum. Orvin Kimbrough serves as the chairman and CEO of Midwest Bank Center, where he helps to empower people, enable businesses, and energize neighborhoods through the strength of the bank's financial services. Midwest Bank Center is St. Louis's second largest privately owned local bank, with over $2.5 billion in assets and over $2 billion in loans. So prior to joining Midwest Bank Center, Orv spent nearly 20 years in leadership roles in prominent nonprofit agencies, most recently as the president and CEO of the United Way of Greater St. Louis. He is a product of the St. Louis Public Schools, graduating from Gateway Tech with probationary acceptance to the University of Missouri-Columbia, where he went on to earn bachelor's and master's degrees in social work. He earned an MBA from the University of Missouri-St. Louis in 2002 and a Master of Theology from Aquinas Institute of Technology in 2006. Orv is a former member of my Chancellor's Council and received the UMSL Distinguished Alum Award in 2019. He is the author of Twice Over a Man, a fierce memoir of an orphan boy who doggedly determined a finer life. I hope everybody gets that book today, and maybe, Orv, you might even sign. So please join me in welcoming Orv Kimbrough.
I have a confession. When I was fresh out of high school and a new student here at the university, I may have done something unethical. I started on campus in the summer of 1994 taking two courses, a college-level English and remedial math. Because I scored a 15 on the ACT, these courses were prerequisites for me to be accepted full-time into college on academic probation. I had so much anxiety about college. As someone who was on the verge of aging out of the foster care system, I knew that college would be a stretch. I had been told that less than 3% of the nearly 30,000 children who aged out of the foster care system annually attended college, and an even smaller percentage would graduate. So I came to the campus that summer knowing that I was trying to do something statistically improbable. But I was here. I was on campus, and after a few weeks into the summer, I knew that I was in trouble. Excelling in English, but troubled by that darn college algebra class. That class was so intimidating. I would break out into sweats during quizzes and exams. I studied as hard as I could, but I just couldn't get it. What I did get is that I had two voices playing in my head. One reminding me that my mother was a poverty-stricken welfare mom who never attended college, and the other reminded me that my God was bigger than all the problems in the universe and the author of what is possible. I needed possibilities, and I needed them fast. I learned that I could take a university-sponsored test to test out of the math class, and that there was no limit on how many times I could take it. So I decided that my goal would be to take the test as frequently as possible, simply to memorize the equations and create a guide for myself. I took the test many times, developed this guide, and ultimately passed on, let's say, the 6th attempt. I would go into the test with only one goal: to memorize the questions, not to actually take the test. I operated within the rules. But was that unethical? I don't know that I would be standing here today if I hadn't exploited that loophole. In ethics, when does the goal justify the means? That summer's decision wouldn't be the last ethical dilemma I would confront. So let me take a few minutes and share how I came to understand ethics, how I define it, and some of the ethical dilemmas that I've faced throughout my diverse career. I was born in the 1970s. My mother and father were not married. I remember as a young boy seeing depictions of Black single mothers, often implying that being a single mother made them bad. What makes something bad? What makes something right or wrong? One morning, when I was just 8 years old, I woke up feeling hungry. I lived with my mom and my siblings, 5 of us, in a 3-room apartment in North St. Louis City. I remember that day vividly. I went over to my mother to ask her if I could eat some crackers. I shook her, but she wouldn't wake up. Eventually, the paramedics arrived and pronounced my mother dead. My mother died at the age of 28 from a drug overdose. When I studied social work in college, I was introduced to the socio-ecological model, which emphasizes understanding people in the context of their environment. My professor stressed that we cannot fully understand a person without considering their surroundings. This insight was transformative for me. It reinforced that an individual's actions, their outcomes, and their moral and ethical perspectives are deeply shaped by their community, by their relationships and the institutions with which they engage. Thinking about my mother's death through a socio-ecological and ethical framework, is it reasonable for me to ask who is responsible for her death? Her individual choices, the environment she grew up in, or the larger societal systems that failed her? I grew up in the poorest parts of St. Louis, and I was a conscientious kid, always asking questions like, why was my neighborhood so different than that other neighborhood? I learned about personal morality and ethics by watching soap operas and shows like Chips, which was a crime drama, and Superman. I came to understand that the foundation of ethics is morality, and morality is our sense of right versus wrong. It's personal, and it's shaped by culture, it's shaped by family, and it's shaped by experiences. As a child, I learned that being a Black single mother in the 1970s was considered immoral by societal standards. But this was completely fine in my culture, and I didn't understand why. What if I told you that there were systematic attempts to keep black families separated in the decades leading up to my birth? Let me explain. In the 60s and 70s, work started to disappear in the urban core. And at the same time, there were government policies called man-in-the-house rules that disqualified children from welfare benefits if their mother was living with or having relations with any single or married able-bodied male. Would that change your perspective on whether the behavior or the outcome of single motherhood was moral or simply a byproduct of unjust systems? So if morality is about right versus wrong and serves as the basis for ethics, the second question is, what specifically is ethics? I see ethics as a system for standardizing how we discern the actions of people in the world, essentially determining what is good versus what is bad. While morality is personal and shaped by experiences, ethics provide a universal framework that helps us evaluate those moral decisions in a broader societal context, allowing us to apply consistent principles in various situations. Now that you know, I believe morality is about our personal sense of right and wrong, while ethics is about a community standard of what is good versus what is bad. Let me walk through some of the ethical dilemmas and concerns that I've faced. I began my career in community development in a poor part of St. Louis. Now, this is one of those communities whose location near cultural assets made it ripe for economic development. So every 20 or 30 years, there is some effort to rally support to help it reimagine itself. Back in the 70s, one of the neighborhood's greatest achievements was convincing the Brown Shoe Company to open a plant in its neighborhood. The plant reached a peak of 275 employees, pulling most of its workers from the Black North Side before it closed a few years later. In 1999, when I was completing college, the neighborhood was going through redevelopment once more. It was the most fascinating thing I had ever seen. A foundation put up money to start the effort. It hired a leader, helped mobilize political support, and there were developers and consultants everywhere. The energy was palpable, and everybody was getting paid. I remember the frustrations and the aspirations of the residents who had been around during the last failed revitalization effort. When I signed on as associate director, I was tasked with monitoring and developing the budget. When I looked at the invoices, I noticed the names of consultants who I had never seen at any community meetings. These were politically connected leaders from all throughout St. Louis. And I had to decide how I was going to handle this. Later, I remember asking the foundation executives who were the boosters for this effort, was this effort set up to succeed? I was chastised and told to shut up. I became disillusioned and wasn't so sure that the goal was to revitalize the community, at least not in the way that matched the hopes of the people who lived there. My boss, who also challenged these unsubstantiated expenses, and the political influence on the effort was let go. And although they wanted me to stay, I decided to leave. At the time, I was making a massive $65,000 a year, which is a significant amount. And the organization was subsidizing my MBA here at the university. Why do you think I left? Why do you think this was an ethical dilemma? When I left the Jeff Vanderloo Initiative, I took a job as Executive Director of Faith Beyond Walls and Interfaith Partnership, boosted by a papal visit to St. Louis in 1999. These organizations had missions to bring diverse leaders together to foster religious and racial reconciliation through service and dialogue. This was a time when I found my voice, and ironically, the ethical consideration often lay in deciding when to speak. In the local market, most of the Black congregations in the coalition were poor and from the city, while most of the white and other racial groups came from the wealthier suburbs. Ethical conflicts arose, such as where to host meetings. Do we always choose the white establishment to make them feel comfortable? Think about the simplicity of this. Ethical dilemmas aren't always complicated, but we dealt with complicated issues also, like do we mobilize to advocate for Medicaid expansion? Many of my Black members said yes, while many of my white members didn't want to get involved in political advocacy. So, how did I make the decision? I asked, what do our values say? Our values say we believe in the dignity of all people and that they deserve health care as a right. I lost some engagement, but we took that fight to the state of Missouri. We were often drawn into broader geopolitical discussions, particularly related to the Middle East, and questions about what was right versus what was wrong, what was good versus what was bad. We only spoke on issues like this when we could present a unified voice. We often took the stance that all lives matter. But was that ethical relativism? When I became CEO of United Way, there were a few things that stand out with ethical tension. Let me share one. In August of 2014, Michael Brown was killed by a police officer. Come on now. Many of you remember the headlines. On August 9, 2014, Michael Brown and a friend were walking in the middle of Canfield Drive, a two-lane street in the St. Louis suburb of Ferguson, when a police officer drove by and told them to get out of the street, use the sidewalk. After words were exchanged, the white officer confronted the 18-year-old Brown, who was Black. The situation escalated, with the officer and Brown scuffling. The officer shot and killed Brown, who was unarmed. Now, there were efforts to characterize Brown, who had gotten into some trouble, and he was no angel. There were efforts to characterize him as a thug. And there were efforts to characterize Officer Wilson as a trigger-happy cop. What happened after that through our region into a tailspin. There were protests and there was rioting. In the midst of all of this, I wrote, the protest really wasn't about Michael Brown. It had taken on a different life. That incident was simply a spark. When you look at what Ferguson as a community was doing, it was financing itself on the backs of the poor and marginalized. And it's not just about Ferguson. We know that this sort of exploitation occurs nationally in poor communities. I wrote then that Ferguson is the canvas on which people were painting the picture of their frustration and hopelessness. Dr. King said that protest is the language of the unheard. I believe then, as I do now, that whether we are talking about rural white or urban black or brown communities, people want fair access to opportunities, and opportunities have everything to do with being heard and being seen. I believe that economic mobility impacts everything, from ideas to business ownership, from justice to education. The ethics education I received during that period was about understanding a power struggle. On one side, there were those who wanted things to return to the way they were. And on the other side, there were advocates who believed that the status quo was no longer acceptable. In the middle were actors who sought to exploit the region's vulnerable state for personal gain. At United Way, I was approached by one such group, directed to me by a powerful company. The group demanded financial resources, suggesting that my decision to provide them would influence how long the riots continued. Do you see the ethical challenge in this? What would you do? Finally, at the bank, I have certainly had my share of calls insinuating that there is a tiered banking system, particularly around making exceptions for people who don't qualify for loans. This means they don't have the cash flow to pay the debt on a loan, or they don't have the collateral to support the loan. These calls often suggest that I should make an extraordinary exception for them. The way I handle those situations is to remind people of who I am and whose I am. In other words, my character is important. As I have gone deeper into leadership and board governance roles, I'm struck by how many unethical decisions made by business leaders stem from being seduced by power. We see this across sectors where governance fails and power distorts leadership. Let me share very briefly a few examples. This reminder that power corrupts if we are not careful forces me to be aware that none of us are immune from doing bad things if the conditions are right. Take, for example, the Wells Fargo employees who were involved in opening millions of accounts without customer authorization to receive bonuses. You can't truly believe that the people at Wells Fargo who facilitated this unethical practice were all inherently bad, can you? What about the fall of Enron, the accounting scandal of a generation? I don't believe for a moment that the Enron executives started out with the intention to defraud their employees and investors. What about the United Way of America CEO? I certainly don't believe that Bill Aramoni, the guy who embezzled or misappropriated donated funds, began his career with dishonest intentions. So what happened? A book that has helped me put these situations into perspective is The Power Paradox: How We Gain and Lose Influence by Dr. Keltner. In my book, Twice Over a Man, I talk about power as one of the core drivers that is a permanent feature throughout our lives. Power for me is more about having personal agency, not allowing people in power or systems to be the sole arbiter of my life outcomes or your life outcomes. Why is that important? You heard me say earlier that on average, less than 3% of people who come from the background I come from will graduate college. Keltner defines power as the ability to make a difference by influencing the actions, the emotions, or behaviors of others. I think my thoughts and his ideas are ethically compatible ideas. But what does he mean by the power paradox? It's such a simple idea, but it's so true of us as humans. We rise in power and make a difference in the world due to what is best about human nature, but we fall from power due to what is worse. Let me go back to a point I made earlier related to the idea that ethics is about helping us sort out what is good versus what is bad. You may be asking the question, is it really that simple? And the answer is no. Ethical dilemmas are rarely binary. Especially in business, ethical decisions are complex and shaped by multiple layers of influence, much like the circumstances surrounding the life and death of my mother, and my decision to memorize the test-out exam. Assigning clear responsibility or making black and white judgments in situations filled with gray areas is less straightforward, it's less simple. Although ethical decisions are rarely binary, when I am questioning a decision, I remind myself of the way I think about ethics. And that is, there are two foundational approaches to ethics. One is fear-based, and one is faith-based. Fear-based frameworks often lead us to unethical behaviors. They lead us to unethical tendencies. When we act out of fear, fear of failure, fear of loss, or fear related to lack or the belief that growth is not accessible, that growth is not plentiful, zero-sum game, we may cut corners. We may deceive. We may take unethical shortcuts. Fear narrows our perspective and limits our decision-making to the short term and to self-preservation. Faith-based frameworks, on the other hand, guide us toward ethical behavior. What do I mean by faith? Faith in ourselves, faith in others, faith in growth, faith in God or a higher purpose. All help us make decisions grounded in integrity, help us make decisions grounded in trust, and help us make decisions grounded in hope. Faith opens us to possibilities and long-term thinking, even when it's difficult. The unethical actions that most reasonable people would recognize as wrong are frequently driven by fear, driven by a mindset set to fail, driven by wrong social networks, driven by a lack of accountability for our actions. Conversely, faith pushes us to act with courage and principle. Now, I began today with a confession, sharing how in my early journey here at the university, I found myself navigating an ethical gray area. As I conclude, I ask you to reflect on this, taking into account my model of a fear-based framework or a faith-based framework to ethical decision-making. Was my decision 30 years ago unethical? what would you have done? Thank you. So it wasn't a rhetorical question. What would you have done? What other questions do you have? Yes? I memorized the material. Yeah, I memorized it. I did not learn it. I memorized it. When I got up to Mizzou, I did get in. I got up to Mizzou. I had that nemesis was there again. I talk about it in the book, and I had to face college algebra again. It's so interesting how, when you are faced with challenges in life, until you figure out a way to go through it, get over it, you're going to keep being faced with it. Every juncture, I've had something to do with math, and it's so ironic today that I lead a bank. Right? Isn't that something? Yeah, with my daughter, she's now studying for the LSAT. When she found out that I was tapped to lead this bank, which is now $3 billion in assets, when she found out I was tapped to lead it, she said, "Dad, do they know you can't count?" So look, all things are possible. Let me just tell you that. Next question. Yes, sir.
Do you feel guilt about that?
No. As I said, I wouldn't be standing here. I mean, so for me, the question is, why should I feel guilty? The rules were set up. I didn't do anything that was against the rules. I wasn't told that I couldn't go in and memorize it and create myself a template, a guide. I wasn't told that. So I feel absolutely no guilt. It set the platform. But here's what I do know. I talk to lots of people at different stages of life, and what we're talking about at a very base level is strategy. And so there are people in society who know the rules to society. And they operate within the rules to achieve what it is they're trying to achieve. Let us not be blinded. Let us not be blinded that there are rules. And so I had to figure out, for me, early on, just like as a kid growing up in foster care, understanding the level system, meaning you go up levels based on your behavior, you get reduced level based on your behavior, and with that came access to things or restrictions. In college, it's the same thing. And in life, it's the same thing. There are rules. And you figure out what the rules are, and then you work within the rules, right? So, no, I felt absolutely no guilt. Yes?
I was kind of curious, do you still remember the terms and formulas from the test that you were doing? And that leads me into another question, if you do, or into another response to that.
So I was talking to some folks earlier, and I said, I wonder if UMSL still has that test. And look, but I will not be putting the answers online. Let's just be clear about that.
Do you remember it, then you did learn it, you just didn't use the right.
So no, I didn't learn it. No, and I thought I said that. So the question for me is, like, so when you set up the scenario, you can take the test as many times as you want. So those were the rules. You can take the test as many times as you want. When I went in to take the test, I would look at the test, and I literally would recite in my head, okay, equation, and I would try to get a bundle, and I would go out, and I would write down, and so I wrote the equations down, and then I studied them, and then I had to go back in and take the test. I actually had to pass the test. I didn't take a cheat sheet in with me. I mean, I actually had to, now, if I had said, by a show of hands, if I had said I took a cheat sheet in, what would you say? Unethical or ethical? Unethical? Right. I did not take a cheat sheet in. Was it unethical? Maybe. Was it? Wait a minute. by a show of hands, we're going to just do a polling here. And remember, we're filming this, right? By a show of hands, who says it was unethical? I did not take a cheat sheet in. I just simply memorized. It was not unethical. Show of hands. It was double negative. Thank you. See, I did do okay in English. Was it ethical? Okay. And look, the chancellor did not raise her hand. Look, I was looking for some assurances over here. But no, I didn't. I honestly did not see it. I saw it as these were the rules. I'm going to have to play by the rules, and I play by the rules. But again, that application is to life in general. Yes.
How do you feel about getting out of stigma and able to actually to help the people that got left behind?
Say it one more time.
How do you feel about getting out and breaking the stigma, but also going back in and helping the people that got left behind?
So the question was, how do I feel about sort of breaking through and then going back and giving other people a hand up? I love it. I mean, I honestly, so when you go to that stat of less than 3% of kids who are in the foster care system will go on to college, and then it's like 1% that actually persists. And so you think about foster kids, and then you think about poor kids. Foster kids is a different generation of poor kids. It's like the bottom of the bottom. I feel so blessed that I get to stand in places, in rooms, and actually help other people dream that it's all possible. And part of that is I know where I come from. I know the struggles that were, and I know the struggles that are, and I'm able to speak your language. Now, my environment, completely different. My life is completely different than when I was a young person, but my point is I love that I am able to stand in my own authenticity no matter where I go. I'm consistent. Doesn't matter if it's the corporate boardroom. I'm consistent. Doesn't matter if it's the bank. I'm consistent. When we're talking about CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, 1975, I was at a regulator meeting a few weeks ago, and I said, hey, we're still, from a banking industry, struggling with the ethics around compliance versus actual strategy in serving poor and low to moderate income communities. I'm very consistent, and I stand on that, and I think that that's important for me to be authentic in who I am. So I absolutely love it. I would not compromise who I am. Every job that I've had, every job, I thought about purpose, I thought about passion, I thought about platform. It has to align with my purpose. I've got to be passionate about it, so I'm not going out to make widgets. And then it's got to give me a platform. Guess what I'm standing on right now? A platform. Guess what you have? You know you have a platform? You have a platform. Each one of us has a platform. It's what you do with it. So I absolutely love the fact that I get to stand in that authenticity. Thank you for that question. Next. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
So you've been speaking on it a little bit already, but what advice do you have for us as students, like now with graduating, finding a job, and overcoming the obstacles that come in our environment?
So the question is, what advice do I have for students who are now trying to figure out their way in the world, overcome obstacles, et cetera? I'll tell you what I tell my kids, and I wrote this in the book. I can't wait for you to read the book and send me a text message, or, well, my cell phone is probably not in it, but my email address is, do what you're passionate about. And I'm not just saying that. I'm like, actually, I believe it. When I studied social work, people said, you're gonna be broke, you're never gonna make any money. And I said, but I wanna help people. That's what I wanna do. I wanna create conditions to help people live better lives. And when you find something that you are passionate about, you're gonna figure out a way to eat and do more than eat and save. I mean, first thing that we wanna do is eat, right? Yes, if you don't eat, you're not here. You wanna eat first. You wanna eat, you're gonna get a house, and then you start to figure out, wait a minute, there's way more to this. So do what you're passionate about. And if you do what you're passionate about, your gifts will make way for you. Do you realize that each of you has a gift?
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. You have a gift. You have a gift. You are uniquely situated. You have a story. Your story is uniquely yours. And you're not just one story, you're many stories. You're many stories. People often hear born poor, grew up in foster care, and they think that that's the story. That's the beginning and the end. It's not. I got plenty more story to write. And so do you. So find something that you're passionate about, lean into that, the money will come. I promise you. And let me just say one other thing, artificial intelligence. If you're in a degree area where you think that the technical, like this technical knowledge is all that you need, I'll tell you, if you know how to engage with people, if you have emotional intelligence, you are situationally and socially aware, those are the people who are going to go to the next level. I'm telling you. So get yourself out of your comfort zone, engage with people, have a conversation, not over a phone. You want to make it? Learn how to engage with people. Help to solve their problem. And then you make it.
Hey, Laura.
Yes.
The people who have these microphones are going to be doing the speaking.
Yes.
And so I think you're next.
Oh,
So you can speak into
well,
that microphone.
well, thank you. A couple things, or thank you for being here. And the second, proud of you.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. I appreciate that.
So in what ways that are significant for you have you learned to embrace change through challenging times, and how did they play a role in your professional and personal life?
So change is ever present. So I go back to my mother died, that was change. I lived in, 5 different settings, that was all change. Group home setting, that was change. I went to college, that was change. The only thing that's constant is change. I've changed jobs multiple times. I've transitioned industries, like whole industries. I was leading United Way, and it was great. I loved it. Awesome experience, but I decided to change. And so I think if we don't embrace change, we are irrelevant. We are irrelevant. So I'm constantly retooling myself. I wrote a book. Come on, guys. I mean, like, thank you. I mean, talk about a challenge. I mean, that was big, a big challenge for me. But I said I wanted to do it, and I did it, and it represented transition and change. When you put something down and you're codifying your thoughts, and you're sitting with those thoughts and you're learning from those thoughts, you are changed as a result of spending time with your thoughts. Someone here earlier said, I hope the book was cathartic. I hope it was therapeutic. It was. It changed me. So change is so important, and don't fear it. Just embrace it. Lean in. I mean, really, do. Just lean in, because it's going to happen whether you move or not. Tomorrow, somebody in here has a birthday tomorrow. Somebody in here has a birthday next week. You're gonna get older. Just embrace it. Just look at change as a natural. It's just a part of our evolution through this thing we call life.
So I have the next question. And I also heard you mention that your daughter is taking the LSAT. So clearly she's pursuing a law degree. I think you mentioned you have an MBA. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And you're sitting in a room with undergraduate students, graduate students, PhD students. What is the passion for continuing to pursue higher education?
Boy, I honestly think we just answered it with the change. I mean, like this, university, when you aggregate learners and thinkers and who are, sort of opining on the world and the conditions in the world and thinking about what's next, this is where the advancements occur. This is actually, if you take it seriously, where you learn critical thinking. Now, some professors may not want you to think critically. They want you to think to this exam. But this is actually, it's not what happens in the actual class always that helps to shape you and form you. It's like this, it's the community that you create. But there's no place, I love university life. There's no place like it. And particularly connecting the practical, like what you guys study in your textbooks to the actual practical, the real world. And I love to make those connections because the world isn't theoretical. The world is not theoretical. The world is pretty practical. Yes.
So I work in an industry where I think this goes for any industry that you have to follow a code of ethics, but if we don't, we're seen as the bad guys or the slimy people. And I just wonder, how do you go about working with people who don't follow a code of ethics so that it doesn't come back onto you associating with them?
So I'm going to tell you how. So you can't be around me, and so I'm going to speak from where I am right now, and maybe where you might be. So who you hang out with in the presentation, I talk about who you hang out with, and not just like who you hang out with, but the people that you're around. You know, if you're in water if you're swimming in contaminated water, everybody's going to be contaminated. So that's contaminated water. So you're either going to conform to that culture, you're going to reform that culture, or you're going to leave that culture, period.
Hello. So I want to ask, you being somewhat in the minority of people who operate on ethics based on a faith-based compared to a fear-based paradigm, how did you manage being able to be kind of the one voice in the sea of many that might, operate more on the fear-based? How do you know if you could have the influence to change it versus having to start your own organization?
So I don't know that I'm in the minority on the faith-based. I think we all have that innate in us. The world wants you to be afraid and wants you to act out of fear, and sometimes we give in to that tendency. But it's just that it's a tendency. I think most people are good people. I think the environments sometimes create the conditions for bad things, and that we all have in us dark and light. Each one of us. I'm telling you, we have it. And anybody who stands here and says, well, I never thought, okay, baloney. You thought it. Baloney. So I operate, though, from the standpoint that we're more good than we're not. So that's first. What was the second part of your question? So I just want everybody to hear that. You got more good in you. It's not like a 50-50 thing. Like, it's 50% this and it's 50% that. No, I think you got more good in you. Otherwise, like most of the world wouldn't be functioning. I mean, we would not function. Now, we got challenges in the world. But if we were all like really bad people, like deep, boy, you wouldn't have a society, because society is based on cooperation, and you gotta want better things for your neighbor. That's at least how I think about it. I'm pretty simple, though. Yes.
I didn't get to come for the beginning of the speech, but are you from St. Louis?
I was born in East St. Louis.
Okay, perfect. So I'm not from here. I'm from Peoria, Illinois, and so I'm the first person in my family to even attempt to really go to college and like do anything with my life from where I'm from. And like you said, with changes, it's just been a never-ending struggle just to get up when I don't have support from family and I don't have support from nobody, and I'm in the city by myself, and I'm really just trying to find a way to move through life by myself. And what advice would you have to somebody like me who's literally out here just doing it all for the first time by yourself, no real direction, but you have the passion to do something, you just don't have no support?
Yeah, so I was you, and I talk about that in the book. I mean, you in a different kind of way. And I talk about the idea of the concept of functional relationships. So you can actually curate people in your life who will help you. You do understand the difference between curating something versus anything else. When you curate, you carefully select. And so for me, I didn't have family. And I was pretty intentional with people that I selected, I curated in my life. And at different phases of life, those people changed out. I pruned. It's the idea of functional relationships. You're in relationship, any relationship, a marital relationship, whatever the relationship is. You're in a relationship because there's mutual exchange. When the imbalance is there, you exit. And if you don't, that becomes a dysfunctional, toxic kind of relationship. When you feel like you're giving more than the other person is giving when it's not balanced. So my point to you is this: you have to be intentional with curating people. So just renaming your social network. When I say rename it, give it a purpose. Give your social network a purpose and choose the people who you want in your life. And it starts here. You've got a community here at the university, and you've got other people who too are yearning for that same kind of connection. And if you rename your social network and you give them a purpose, you can choose people and just say, okay, look, for me, I pledged a fraternity. That helped. But in the book, you'll see I was also very clear on, let me just say, on college life, it's not just all about partying and bullshit, right? So I was very clear on what my goal was, and anything that got in the way of that, you were on an island in relationship with me. So you're not by yourself. You may be doing it for the first time. But you're not by yourself. You have a community around you. Curate.
I think we've got time for one more question.
One more question.
Can I just add a plug?
Yes.
So Accounting Club this afternoon has a speaker from the Foster and Adoptive Care Coalition coming. So everybody's invited if you want to continue talking about not-for-profits and what you can do for foster care kids. We also have Stiefel coming and FDIC. But it's a chance to talk about not-for-profits and to socialize with people around you here at the College of Business. Everybody's invited. We'd love for you to come.
Everybody's invited. One last question. Yes.
What can we do as students to help revitalize the neighborhoods that are around us? What tangible steps can we take?
So one of the things I'm going to a presentation right after this, and it's a foundation and a bunch of people who are coming to this. And I often talk to people. I've been in banking now for 6 years, and we tend to overcomplicate things, like in terms of revitalization. So when you make something really big, it's really big. But think about what's required for communities to be revitalized. And for those of you who are finance and economics people, you understand like what makes our country and pretty much any society go around. You need commercial activity. So you need businesses. You need population. You need people. And you need people spending stuff. And so what my lane, when I think about what we're trying to do at the bank, is we're trying to sort of facilitate some of that. And I've been on this speaking tour for the last 6 years talking about shared economic prosperity. And it starts with something as basic and as passive as where you bank. How many of you know how banks work? You deposit money and then they lend that money out. So on the bank side, it's a liability. That deposit is a liability. We lend that money out. So you want to bank in places that is actually conducting business in communities that need to be revitalized. And it's just that simple. You said it, it's your money is safe, but you bank in places that are aligned with your values. We call it bank your values. Most people won't get that because we bank based on behavioral, it's based on location. Is Granny set this account up for me, and I'm banking with Chime. you're going to be in trouble at some point. I'm banking with Chime, right? My point is, it's the small things that you do, and you make sure that your financial institution is aligned with what you say your values are. If you say your values is to see growth and see trajectory changing kinds of investments in low to moderate income communities, then you ought to be banking with institutions that are doing that work. It's like really simple. It's not complicated. And then you ask questions, like, show me what you're doing in community X, Y, or Z. And if you're not delivering services, I'm not talking about delivering services to nonprofits. We generally think, well, the best thing that we can do is invest in a nonprofit. Well, you saw in my presentation talking about the Jeff Vanderloo Initiative, you know, you can invest in nonprofits, I think that's great. But there is no community that has ever changed the trajectory of that community based on charity alone. We are seduced by charity and we're seduced by government, period. You can't do community revitalization based on charity and government. You need commercial activity. Look at any community development effort. If you don't have it, it fails, and every 20 to 30 years, we're asking the question, what can we do to help you reimagine yourself? It's simple. Bank differently, ask questions, show up, volunteer, open a business. You guys are industrious people. You can open businesses. Thank you.
I am sure every one of us, we will have a lot of valuable takeaways from Orv's fantastic speaking event today. Thank you so much, Orv. We're really grateful for the insights that you share, and especially the inspiration you bring to all of us and your personal stories. I want to say this. At one point in our lives, all of us will face some dilemma when we need to make a decision. Today, it may be a college algebra test, right? And tomorrow, you know what happens to all of you? You will rise to leadership. You will rise to the position where you are going to be responsible for making bigger decisions. You will have authority. You will lead a team. You will lead organizations. And when you're confronted with some dilemmas and very difficult decisions to make, I hope you will remember Orv's talk and his inspiration, and also the spirit of this ethics speaking event. For instance, Marcella and Sandra both have spoken at this event before. And I also want to remind all of us, it's through our personal faith and conduct, but in addition to that is our community, how we come together to support each other, to inspire each other, so we can continue to be successful. So in the future, if you are confronted with that moment where you feel, I need to make a decision right now, which way should I go? I hope you will remember, fear not and be of a good courage, for I am with you. So in that moment, all the knowledge and inspirations and stories that we have heard from our alumni cohort will come to that fruition, and I am confident that you will make a very ethical decision. So I want to thank everybody for being here today. This concludes the speaking portion of this event. Let me remind you, both Sandra and Marcella will be in the lobby, so they will be available to you and to have wonderful one-on-one conversations. Lunch will be served in the lobby. Thank you, everybody, for coming.